Mississippi River Network. Welcome to today's webinar, Restoring America's River, using the Water Resources Development Act to mend the Upper Mississippi River. This webinar is focused on a report released by the Nicollet Island Coalition. It is hosted by the Mississippi River Network, a coalition of 47 different organizations located throughout the Mississippi River Basin who are dedicated to protecting and restoring the Mississippi River. Several members of the network are also in the Nicollet Island Coalition, so we are happy to bring this webinar to you on their behalf. And I'm going to go through a few technical points before we get started with the content of the webinar. It is being recorded, and the recording itself will be posted at the website that you see here with the press release following today's webinar. You will notice that participants are muted, so we are going to actually take questions at the end via the chat window, which is on the right side of your screen, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we get to that point. But for that purpose of just having so many people joining us, it's easiest to just have everyone on mute. So I thank you for your cooperation. Okay, and now I'm going to pass it off to our speakers who are going to get started. Olivia?
Hi. Yes, hello, sorry. My name is Olivia Dorothy, and I am with the Isaac Walton League of America, and I'm the report's main author. The report that we are discussing today was written by the Nicollet Island Coalition, and the coalition is a diverse group of conservation and economic experts focused on supporting the ecological and economic integrity of the Upper Mississippi River. You can see a complete list of the coalition organizations on the screen. And to discuss the report and help answer questions today, we have on the call Rachel Dawson from National Wildlife Federation, Gwyneth Collins from Prairie Rivers Network, Denny Kniff from River Alliance of Wisconsin, Josh Sewell from Taxpayers for Common Sense, and Christine Favilla from the Sierra Club. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Dawson. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation. I am a legislative representative for the water team, and as such, the Water Resources Development Act that's currently under consideration in Congress is part of my portfolio. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that piece of legislation just for background purposes and give you a status update on where things are in Congress. So in a nutshell, WRDA is a very big piece of legislation. It's intended to be periodic, and it authorizes U.S. Army Corps of Engineers water resources projects under three main headings of a mission. So those are navigation, flood control, ecosystem restoration, and those sorts of projects across the country. Traditionally, this bill has been a very large package of earmarks, but with the congressional ban on earmarks right now, they've had to kind of retool and figure out a way to do a WRDA without any earmarks in it. So now these bills focus a little bit more on policy changes than they do on actual specific projects. Ostensibly, these kinds of things include focusing on speeding up project timelines, project financing, and the use of certain funds. So right now, we have a situation where the Senate has already passed on a bipartisan basis their WRDA, and that was earlier this year in May. The House has reportedly nearly finished drafting their bill. The committee has vowed to bring it to a markup to a vote after recess, and with the expectation that they'll take it to the floor pretty quickly this fall. We've seen some reports that say that this bill actually has a pretty decent chance of passing and being signed into law in a Congress that tends to not want to do that very often this year. So the Senate bill contains several things that have caused a lot of concern among the conservation community, and I want to quickly go through just a couple of highlights from that to give you an idea of why this bill is a big challenge and why it holds a lot of opportunities that tend to go unmet right now. There were several damaging provisions included in the Senate bill. Easily chief among these were the project acceleration and the study acceleration provisions. They're so-called streamlining provisions, which is a very nice name for something that we think is pretty ill-advised. Under the guise of speeding up projects, these provisions would actually prevent comprehensive and meaningful environmental reviews of core projects, which can be very big and landscape altering. So we think that we should have a lot of scrutiny and vetting of these kinds of projects. It can also put a lot of pressure on the resource agencies and limit public involvement. Secondly, the Middle Mississippi River Pilot Program in the Senate bill as written would allow scarce and really important restoration dollars to actually be spent on navigation improvements, which isn't something that we tend to agree with. And third, as an example, the Olmsted project, which is a huge lock and dam project. It is way overdue, way over budget, and the bill would have it being fully federally funded, which is about $1.5 billion on the taxpayer shoulders, which takes scarce dollars away from other projects and eliminates the sort of long-standing tradition of cost sharing to make sure good projects and much-needed projects are actually built. We also saw in the Senate bill that there was a missed chance for a lot of positive reform that would really modernize and improve the way the Corps does its business. It's pretty archaic processes, and they would really like to do certain things certain ways and not change a whole lot over time. We'd love to see them periodically adapt their project planning to current science and conditions. We think something like that would make a world of difference for the upper Mississippi and habitats and ecosystems that are in similar situations. So we really expect and hope that the House will take some positive steps this fall.
Thanks, Rachel. My name is Olivia Dorothy, and I am the Regional Conservation Coordinator for the Isaac Walton League of America. And I'm going to briefly go over the report's general findings. Our work focuses on the upper Mississippi River, which is the region north of Cairo, Illinois, and includes the Illinois River but excludes the Missouri River. This is the area that is defined by Congress as the upper Mississippi River Basin. Amy, can you move to the next slide? The upper Mississippi River was changed forever in the 1930s when Congress authorized the 9-foot channel project amid objections from the Corps of Engineers and the Isaac Walton League. Actually, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service supported the project initially. The 29 locks and dams on the upper Mississippi River and the 8 on the Illinois River caused the river to change course, eliminating seasonal flood and drought pulses on which many native plants and wildlife depended. The dams also caused sediment to fill shallow pools and ripples, eliminating important habitat in the river. The infrastructure and traffic itself also facilitates the spread of invasive species that can cause damage to ecotourism. Land use changes in the basin are also, they also exacerbate problems by creating nutrient pollution that can threaten aquatic and human health. Maintaining this damaging infrastructure is very costly, and most of that cost is incurred by taxpayers, not by the river users itself. You can go to the next slide. And so our report focuses on how the Water Resources Development Act can be used to restore and protect the Mississippi River. Our recommendations ask Congress to start making smarter infrastructure investments that bring navigation subsidies in line with other transportation sectors and focus spending on maintenance, small-scale, and non-structural projects. We also suggest that Congress make meaningful investments in restoration by appropriating the authorized funding amounts for habitat improvement. And the Corps must adopt up-to-date planning models to reflect real costs and benefits when making decisions about water resource projects. The Corps still uses planning models developed in 1983. By adopting these changes, we think that the upper Mississippi River can be revitalized and protected. And I thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. I am Joshua Sewell, Senior Policy Analyst at Taxpayers for Common Sense, a fiscally conservative federal budget watchdog, and I will discuss navigation trends in the region and infrastructure funding. Now, one thing that's important to note is people have used the Mississippi River as a means of navigation for centuries, and there is a continued role for commercial navigation into the 21st century, but federal spending, including on transportation infrastructure, must provide a greater bang for the buck, especially in a post-sequestration, resource-constrained environment, an environment in which we now find ourselves. We absolutely cannot afford to continue pouring federal tax dollars into poorly performing projects or those projects that just aren't as critical as others. Now, what this report deals with is the Upper Mississippi and the Illinois Waterways. It's a series of 29 navigation locks and dams on the Mississippi and 8 more on the Illinois, all of which are a part of our nation's greater inland waterway system. For nearly 30 years, federal investments on this system have been guided through a partnership between federal taxpayers and the primary beneficiaries of the system, the commercial navigation industry, whose very existence is made possible by these federal investments. Now, this partnership comes through the Inland Waterways Trust Fund, which ensures users of the system invest in its success through a 20-cent per gallon user fee on fuel used on the system. In addition to the user fee, there are critical Reagan administration established cost-sharing rules required for spending from the trust fund. Under these, the tab for construction and major rehabilitation of the locks and dams that make up commercial navigation are split 50-50 between users and federal taxpayers. Importantly, the trust fund does not cover annual maintenance costs, which are 100% covered by taxpayers, and which can exceed the annual construction spending by as much as 400%. You can go to the next slide, please. Despite promises from the Corps and the barge industry, promises used to justify federal spending on navigation expansion on the Upper Miss and the Illinois rivers to begin with, traffic itself has declined or flatlined for decades. It's pretty obvious when you see this trend line that the promises of increased navigation because of increased spending have not occurred. Now, this is a trend seen throughout much of the inland waterway system. The Corps and industry has overpromised and underdelivered. Couple this with significant and repeated cost overruns at Corps projects due to poor design and poor management, as well as simply stretching the Corps too thin across too many projects, and now we have an Inland Waterway Trust Fund that is effectively bankrupt. So now we're in a situation where the Corps has an estimated backlog of more than 1,000 authorized yet unconstructed projects, with a price tag estimated at north of $60 billion. Yet the barge industry is proposing a solution that will actually exacerbate this problem. So in this slide you can see that the trust fund is significantly inadequate for the appetite of the barge industry. You can go to the next slide, please. So industry lobbyists are proposing a bait and switch to bail them out of their financial responsibilities on the inland waterways. Under the industry-created plan, as embodied by Congressman Whitfield's Wave 4 Act and Senator Casey's River Act, inland waterways users would no longer contribute 1 cent to construction or rehabilitation of navigation dams. They would only be responsible for lock rehabilitations above a cost threshold never before seen for a lock rehabilitation. And perhaps most egregiously, taxpayers would be stuck with 100% of the tab for any construction cost overruns. This get-out-of-jail-free card is a giveaway rightfully not afforded to any other federal infrastructure program. Now, in exchange for nearly eliminating these long-established cost-sharing rules, commercial interests would see a user fee increase of a mere 6 to 9 cents per gallon. That's an amount that won't even make up for the buying power lost to inflation, since the per gallon user fee has sat at 20 cents per gallon since the first Clinton administration. This is irresponsible. These locks and dams were created for the benefit of navigation. The financial tab for keeping the system needs to be borne by the navigation industry. You can go to the next slide, please. Rather than bail out the barge industry, Congress needs to rethink how it manages both the Upper Mississippi and the Illinois, as well as the entire inland waterway system. We need a system of project prioritization where funds can be dedicated to a smaller number of the best performing projects to reduce construction delays and get these projects done. As part of this, we should be deauthorizing outdated and economically underperforming projects. Simply getting our money back for what we spend isn't a high enough bar. We must raise the bar and have better projects because we just have to do this. We cannot afford to do it otherwise. And we're happy to have users contribute more revenue to the system. But we absolutely must not abandon Reagan-established cost-sharing rules that ensure the users have skin in the game. At a time when federal taxpayers are stretched to the limit, increasing an already excessive industry subsidy is something taxpayers cannot afford. It's not in the interest of the basin, and it's not in the interest of the country. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Glynis Collins, Executive Director of Prairie Rivers Network, and I will go over how ecosystem restoration efforts can be improved through the Water Resources Development Act. As Olivia mentioned earlier, in constructing and maintaining the locks and dams, we completely changed the river system. In supporting commercial navigation, we wrote off a host of other elements of the vast natural infrastructure that the river provides. So now we find coastal Louisiana's wetlands eroding away, starved of sediments, while in the upper Miss, the wetlands and backwaters are choked by too much mud. Declining fish populations have destroyed commercial fisheries on the river and left it vulnerable to infestation by invaders like zebra mussels and Asian carp. Levees cutting off the river from its floodplain have created a false sense of security, meaning flood events cause unnecessary loss of life and property damage. But we know that it is possible to bring back some of the natural wealth of the upper Mississippi River, and that's why restoration is a key priority for this Water Resources Development Act. As our report points out, there are river restoration programs in the upper Mississippi Basin. The main one is the Army Corps' Environmental Management Program, and the slide in front of you now shows project sites since that program began in 1986. So far, the program has restored over 100,000 acres across 50 project sites. Next slide, please. And this slide shows actual funding for that restoration program through time. In 2001, Congress bumped up authorization for spending by the program to $30 million per year, but as you see, only in 2009, as part of the stimulus package, was this program fully funded. And the other restoration programs in the Upper Miss are getting almost no funding. Next slide, please. So our recommendations on restoration in WRDA are, first of all, to increase restoration funding. Congress should start fully funding the restoration programs we have in place. Second is to expand the geographic scope of restoration programs. Right now, the main restoration program, the Environmental Management Program, is strictly limited to work in the main channel of the Upper Mississippi River. To get the most public benefit from restoration projects, the projects should be allowed to move up into the tributaries and from bluff to bluff, sort of encompassing the whole river system rather than just the main channel. And finally, we need to prioritize reconnecting floodplains. We already have a program that allows land buyouts to take down levees and restore areas of floodplain, but this program has received almost no funding. Congress should appropriate funding to this very important program. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Danny Kneff, Executive Director of the River Alliance of Wisconsin, based in Madison. The Upper Mississippi is our west coast, and so we care a lot about what happens with the Upper Mississippi. And some of the issues you've heard described already on the webinar might have their problems may have their roots in a flawed planning process by the Corps of Engineers, starting with the fact that it's outdated. The so-called principles and guidelines were written in 1983. The Corps still pretty much runs by these principles and guidelines. Corps happens to enjoy concrete and steel, and in so doing, they fail to give weight to the benefits of ecological restoration that might be easier on the river and certainly less expensive. The Corps also has a habit of underestimating the cost of their hard infrastructure projects. They often don't quantify the ecological services of restoring floodplains or wetlands. And these are all kind of inherent flaws in the planning process by the Corps. Next slide. So we have recommendations to Congress to make to the Corps, and to rethink really how they plan their projects. One way would to urge the Corps to consider the least environmentally damaging approach to plan starting from that standpoint as opposed to the hard infrastructure standpoint. Think about small-scale or non-structural measures that would would help the navigation industry, but also would do less damage to the river. The planning process should also include enhancing natural functions like bringing back wetlands to reduce flood risk. And the cost and benefit analysis of
Okay, thank you, Denny. That concludes the briefing for this report, and what you see in front of you now is a list of the members of the Nicollet Island Coalition. So you can see their contact information if you want to follow up with them after today's webinar. But right now we have an opportunity to take any questions that our participants may have. If you have a question, what I would ask you that you do is submit that in the chat window. So you could type that out, and you could send that question to me, and I can read that, and people will have the opportunity to respond to it, our speakers. So I'll give you a second to do that. At this moment, I'm not seeing any questions, but I will allow a little bit of time for anyone who does have a question to submit that in the chat window. Okay, so we do have a question here, and I'm going to pull it up. Okay, so we do have actually a correction here. Christine Favilla's phone number is actually 618-462-6802. So I'll just repeat that again. The number for Christine Favilla is actually 618-462-6802. Okay. If there are any other questions, I will give you another moment. Feel free to just type it into the chat window. Okay. So this question comes from, and I'm trying to make sure I can see it. All right, this question comes from Ed Tibbetts. Is there an estimate on what cost taxpayers would bear if the 6 to 9 cent increase is approved, along with changes to the formula on how the trust fund is allocated in Wave 4? Do any of our speakers want to take that?
Yeah, this is Josh at Taxpayers. Yeah, the industry's call is for essentially $200 million a year to be spent. And so right now, through the trust fund, you're generating between 75 and 85, for the most part, $1 million. And so you're essentially going to see a doubling of the taxpayer contribution, at least, is the thought, because but it does, again, it does depend on exactly how much money is raised. And again, the estimate, the amount of traffic on these waterways is has not been very good, and so it could easily be $100 million to $200 million a year. And in addition to these cost-sharing changes and these and the fuel tax increase, there are other issues with the federalization of Olmsted and the federalization of other projects, which is essentially one by one Congress is taking projects off of the cost-sharing agreement, again, that's been around for 30 years and has saved us money, and saying, well, mistakes were made, but now taxpayers are going to pay for 100% of the cost. And so the ultimate cost of that, unfortunately, the sky is the limit.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Are there any other speakers that would like to comment on that? Okay. Our next question, this is from Greg Gens. One of my biggest concerns is the inability of the EP program to be implemented on non-federal lands. Provisions made to local sponsor contribution for viable projects on public land and waters. So we have a comment from Greg Gens. Is there anyone who would like to comment on that.
Just Glenn from Rivers Network. We're based out of Champaign, Illinois. Yeah, we agree that we need and want local sponsors to be part of this work. Again, that sort of same, skin in the game argument. We talk about the navigation industry and plus the whole burden of conservation, protecting land. We probably can't afford the government to be doing all of that. But we do need improvements to the program to make it easier for those local partners to step up and be a part of it. And I don't know, Olivia, if you have anything to add?
No, I think you did a great job covering that, Glennis.
Okay. So again, if you have a question, feel free to submit it in the chat window. Okay, so it appears we do not have any more questions. Are there any final comments from our speakers today?
So Olivia, with the Isaac Walton League, I just really want to thank everybody for joining us, and please contact myself or any of our coalition partners if you want. If you have any follow-up questions or if you want any interviews with your local organizations, I encourage you to follow up on that through those individuals listed on the screen. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. And I just want to remind everyone that those of you who attended the webinar, you will get a follow-up email with the link to both the report and a recording of this webinar if you would like to access it later. So with that said, thank you everyone for joining us today, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.